Hey guys, tonight we drift into warm, open water that looks harmless enough at first glance. The sea is calm, almost lazy, rolling beneath you in slow, rhythmic breaths. The sky is wide and blue, clouds stretched thin like cotton pulled apart by idle hands. If you didn't know any better, you'd think this was one of the safest places on Earth to pass through. And honestly, that's what makes it unsettling. Because this patch of ocean has a reputation for quietly erasing people. Ships, planes, entire crews gone. No explosions, no dramatic final words, just absence. And if you're being honest with yourself, dropped into this situation with modern confidence and ancient luck, you probably wouldn't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what your local time is right now. There's something comforting about knowing how far this voice is traveling while you rest. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the deck of a ship moving steadily forward, cutting a clean white line through deep blue water. Nothing feels wrong yet. That's the first trick of this place. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't announce itself. There's no signpost, no ominous fog rolling in on cue. You don't cross a line and suddenly feel doomed. You just keep going, surrounded by normality, while stories pile up behind you like quiet warnings no one fully agrees on. The water here is warm, fed by powerful currents that slide past your hull with practiced confidence. Sailors have trusted these waters for centuries because, statistically speaking, they should be safe. Major shipping lanes run straight through this region. Commercial flights pass overhead every single day. Yet despite all that traffic, the name alone still tightens something in your chest. Bermuda Triangle. Even if you're a skeptic, even if you roll your eyes at the supernatural hype, the phrase sticks. You lean against the railing and look down. The ocean is darker than you expect, almost bottomless. Sunlight penetrates only so far before being swallowed completely. Somewhere below you, layers of history are stacked invisibly. Anchors, wreckage, cargo, maybe even things that were never officially recorded. Mainstream historians point out that many supposed disappearances happened during periods when navigation was unreliable, when logs were incomplete, and when losing a ship wasn't shocking news. But that explanation doesn't fully settle your nerves. It never does. Part of the unease comes from how normal everything feels right now. The wind is gentle. The instruments seem fine. The horizon is clean and uninterrupted. If danger came with obvious signals, you could prepare. Instead, you're left waiting, listening to the quiet creak of the ship, the soft slap of water against steel. Sailors in earlier centuries described this same calm, writing about days when the sea felt too still, like it was holding its breath. Historians still argue whether those descriptions reflect real atmospheric conditions, or simply the anxiety of men isolated at sea for too long. You check the compass. The needle quivers slightly before settling, probably nothing. Compasses do that sometimes. Still, you notice it. People always do in hindsight. Later, when stories are told, that tiny detail becomes important. The compass was acting strange, someone says, and suddenly a small, explainable wobble turns into evidence of something far larger and far more mysterious. This area earned its reputation slowly. It wasn't one dramatic event that set the legend in stone. It was accumulation. A ship overdue here. A plane that never arrived there. Reports that didn't quite match. Coordinates that felt off by just enough to be unsettling. In the mid-20th century, writers began grouping these events together, drawing invisible lines between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Before that, sailors simply called it dangerous water, like many other places on the map. Giving it a shape gave it power. You feel that power now, even if you don't believe in it. Humans are wired to respond to patterns, especially threatening ones. When enough disappearances are clustered together, your brain fills in gaps automatically. A quirky tidbit often mentioned is that some early maps labeled parts of this region with vague warnings like unknown waters, which later storytellers interpreted as ancient knowledge of danger. In reality, mapmakers labeled half the ocean that way. But once the idea takes hold, it refuses to let go. The ship hums steadily beneath your feet, engines working, systems responding, everything functioning exactly as it should. That's the other reason the Bermuda Triangle works so well as a bedtime fear. It doesn't rely on chaos. It relies on calm. You're not battling waves or screaming into radios. You're just moving forward, unaware of whether anything will happen at all. You imagine earlier sailors here, standing where you stand now, smelling salt and wood instead of metal and fuel. They didn't have satellites or weather forecasts. A sudden storm could rise in minutes, swallowing ships whole before anyone understood what was happening. Mainstream science reminds us that this region is notorious for fast-forming storms and powerful currents like the Gulf Stream, which can scatter debris quickly and leave little behind. That explains a lot, maybe even most of it. And yet you keep listening to the sea, half expecting it to say something back. The ocean never does. It just keeps moving, indifferent and vast. That indifference is unsettling in its own way. No malice, no intention, just water doing what water has always done, while humans assign meaning after the fact. As night begins to creep closer, the blue deepens and the horizon softens. Lights flicker on along the deck, small human dots against an enormous natural backdrop. You're still safe, still here, still moving. But now you understand why this place lingers in the imagination. Not because it kills loudly, but because it doesn't need to. You keep moving forward, and that's when the strange part settles in. Not a sudden fear, but a question. Where exactly are you right now? Not philosophically, geographically. You'd expect a place with this kind of reputation to have firm borders, maybe a bold outline on nautical charts, something official and undeniable. But the Bermuda Triangle refuses to cooperate like that. Its edges blur the moment you try to pin them down. If you ask 10 different sources where the triangle begins and ends, you'll get 10 slightly different answers. The most common version stretches from Miami to Bermuda to Puerto Rico, forming a loose triangle that looks tidy on paper. But that's more of a storytelling convenience than a scientific agreement. Some maps pull the lines wider, swallowing more of the Atlantic. Others shrink it, trimming away inconvenient incidents that don't fit the narrative. As your ship glides through the water, you realize there was no moment when an alarm went off saying, "You're inside now. You just arrived." Or maybe you haven't, it's hard to tell. This uncertainty is part of the legend's strength. A place without clear borders can expand endlessly in the imagination. Sailors historically described dangerous regions loosely, based on experience rather than coordinates. To them, here was where bad things happen often enough to be remembered. Modern GPS has spoiled you a little. You expect precision, latitude, longitude, a clean digital dot showing your position. Yet even now, when you look at the charts, there's nothing visually different about this water compared to anywhere else in the Atlantic. Mainstream historians point out that the so-called triangle overlaps with some of the busiest travel routes in the world. That matters more than most people realize. More ships and planes passing through naturally means more chances for accidents, mechanical failures, or human mistakes. When incidents happen in remote oceans, they're rarely noticed. When they happen here, they're noticed immediately and remembered. Historians still argue whether the clustering of incidents reflects true danger or simply higher traffic combined with selective memory. You think about how names shape perception. Before the mid-1900s, hardly anyone called this area the Bermuda Triangle. It was just ocean. Dangerous sometimes, sure, but no more cursed than any other stretch plagued by storms and strong currents. The name itself didn't become popular until writers began packaging scattered stories together. Once labeled, the region transformed overnight into something more than geography. It became an idea. The ship's instruments glow softly as evening deepens. Coordinates scroll quietly on a screen nearby, numbers ticking forward without drama. A quirky detail often overlooked is that the triangle isn't recognized by the International Hydrographic Organization at all. It doesn't appear on official nautical charts as a distinct region. No warnings, no special markings. If you were a captain relying solely on official documentation, you'd never know this place was supposed to be special. And yet the stories persist. You've probably heard claims that compasses behave differently here because the region aligns with true north, rather than magnetic north. It sounds ominous until you learn that this alignment shifts naturally over time and occurs in multiple places around the globe. Navigators are trained to account for it. But again, The detail sticks because it feels technical enough to be convincing and mysterious enough to be unsettling. As the coastline fades farther behind you, the sense of isolation grows. Borders on land are obvious, roads change, signs switch languages, architecture shifts. At sea, transitions are subtle. The water doesn't care about your maps. 1 mile looks like the next. That sameness makes it easy for stories to bleed together. A ship that vanished hundreds of miles away might get pulled into the triangle's orbit later, simply because it sounds right. You rest your hands on the railing and imagine invisible lines drawn beneath the waves. They don't exist, of course, but your mind insists on them anyway. Humans love boundaries. They help us feel oriented, safe. The Bermuda Triangle denies you that comfort. It exists everywhere and nowhere at once, expanding or shrinking depending on who's telling the story. There's also the problem of time. Incidents separated by decades are often spoken about as if they happened back to back. A ship lost in the 1800s gets mentioned alongside a plane disappearance from the 1940s, and suddenly it feels like an ongoing pattern rather than isolated events. This collapsing of time makes the triangle feel active, as if it's always hungry, always waiting. Sailors once believed that certain parts of the ocean were cursed simply because they were poorly understood. Without accurate charts, currents could push ships far off course, making familiar routes feel unreliable. The Gulf Stream, which runs through this region, is particularly powerful. It can carry debris and evidence away quickly, making wrecks difficult to find. Mainstream oceanographers see this as a practical explanation for why so little is recovered after accidents here. No wreckage fuels imagination. No answers invite speculation. You check your position again, just numbers, calm, obedient numbers. The ship doesn't seem to care that you're supposedly inside one of the most infamous regions on Earth. That indifference almost feels mocking. If something were truly wrong with this place, wouldn't you feel it by now? Wouldn't there be a sign, a sound, a shift in the air? But the triangle never works that way. It doesn't rely on spectacle. It relies on ambiguity, on the discomfort of not knowing where danger is supposed to begin. You're left navigating not just water, but uncertainty itself. As darkness settles fully, the sea reflects the stars in broken fragments. Up here, you're surrounded by quiet certainty, metal, lights, steady movement. Down there, beneath the surface, is a vastness that refuses to be neatly defined. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't trap you with walls. It unsettles you by dissolving them entirely. You imagine earlier versions of yourself out here, long before engines hummed and screens glowed. Back then, the ship beneath your feet would have been wood and rope, stitched together with iron nails and optimism. The sea felt closer somehow, less filtered by technology, more immediate. And in waters like these, that closeness could turn dangerous quietly, without warning or drama. Early sailors didn't talk about the Bermuda Triangle as a single cursed place. They talked about routes that felt wrong, days when winds stalled or shifted too suddenly, nights when stars vanished behind thick clouds, leaving nothing to steer by. Navigation depended on dead reckoning, the careful guessing of speed and direction over time. One small miscalculation could push you miles off course. Mainstream maritime historians note that this region of the Atlantic was especially unforgiving to early navigation because of its complex currents and unpredictable weather patterns. Lose your bearings here, and you might never find them again. You picture a merchant ship from the 1700s, heavy with cargo, sails straining as it pushes westward. The crew watches the horizon constantly, scanning for land that never appears. Fresh water runs low. Food spoils faster in the heat. A sudden storm rises, snapping masts and tearing sails to ribbons. When the sea calms again, the ship drifts, damaged and directionless. No radio, no rescue. If that vessel never reaches port, history records it simply as lost at sea. Centuries later, someone notices the coordinates and quietly adds it to the triangle's growing list. One widely cited disappearance involves the USS Cyclops in 1918. A massive cargo ship that vanished with 309 people aboard while traveling through this general region. No distress signal, no wreckage, nothing. It remains one of the largest non-combat losses in U.S. naval history. Mainstream explanations range from structural failure to overloading, but the lack of evidence keeps it firmly lodged in popular imagination. Even skeptics admit that its disappearance was deeply unusual for its time. A quirky detail often mentioned is that many early ships carried cargoes that could shift dangerously in rough seas, coal or grain. If the load moved suddenly, the ship could capsize in minutes. Historians still argue whether the Cyclops fell victim to this exact scenario, or whether something else went catastrophically wrong. The ocean, unhelpfully, never clarified. You run your fingers along the smooth railing and try to imagine how silence must have felt back then. When a ship vanished, it didn't leave behind speculation or theories. It left behind waiting, families waiting at ports, owners waiting for cargo, weeks turning into months before hope quietly thinned out. The mystery wasn't thrilling. It was slow and heavy. Only much later did writers turn that waiting into suspenseful legend. The Caribbean and Western Atlantic were busy long before modern trade routes formalized them. Spanish treasure fleets, British merchant vessels, privateers, and explorers all passed through these waters. Pirates lurked not because the sea was supernatural, but because traffic was dense. More ships meant more opportunity and more losses. Storms didn't discriminate between honest traders and thieves. When ships failed to arrive, blame often fell on weather, war, or bad luck. The idea of a singular mysterious zone came much later. You think about logs, the handwritten records meant to tell a ship's story. They were only as good as the person writing them. Errors crept in easily, misread instruments, sloppy entries, fading ink. Over time, those small inaccuracies grow. A ship lost near the Bahamas becomes lost somewhere in the Atlantic, then eventually in the Bermuda Triangle. Historians still debate how many incidents attributed to the triangle actually occurred within its commonly cited boundaries at all. The night air cools slightly, and the ship creaks softly, echoing sounds sailors centuries ago would recognize instantly. Wood or steel, the ocean treats them the same. It presses, it pulls, it waits. Early sailors often believed the sea itself had moods, that certain regions were temperamental or cursed. Without scientific explanations, superstition filled the gaps. Strange lights on the horizon became omens. Unusual cloud formations became warnings. There are accounts of sailors reporting eerie calm followed by violent storms, giving rise to the idea that this area could switch personalities without warning. Modern meteorology explains this as the result of warm water, fast-moving air masses, and powerful currents interacting in complex ways. But knowing the explanation doesn't fully erase the discomfort. Experiencing it firsthand would still feel like betrayal by something that looked peaceful moments earlier. You imagine being on watch as clouds gather too quickly, wind snapping sails before orders can be shouted. In the chaos, the ship takes on water. Men are thrown overboard. In minutes, it's over. No one survives to tell the story accurately. The ocean erases the evidence, scattering fragments across miles of current. Centuries later, all that remains is a gap in records and a perfect opening for legend. As your modern ship continues on, steady and indifferent, you realize something unsettling. The Bermuda Triangle didn't earn its reputation through spectacle. It earned it through absence, through ships that simply didn't come back, through silence that begged for explanation. And once that silence was given a name, it became impossible to ignore. You don't have to imagine too hard before the story jumps forward in time, because this is where the Bermuda Triangle truly hardens into legend. The year is 1945. World War II is winding down, but the ocean doesn't care about that. It's still doing what it always does, moving, shifting, hiding things. Above it, 5 U.S. Navy training planes lift off from Florida on what should be a routine exercise. Just another afternoon in the sky. Nothing dramatic planned. Nothing historic intended. You're sitting in one of those planes now, shoulder to shoulder with other trainees, the engine's steady vibration buzzing through your bones. This flight is called Flight 19. 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, each piloted by men who have flown before. Not rookies, not reckless daredevils, just young pilots doing what they've been trained to do. Practice navigation, drop dummy bombs, return home in time for dinner. At first, everything goes exactly as expected. You follow the planned route, you hit your targets. The sea below looks endless and identical in every direction, but that's normal. Then something small goes wrong. The kind of thing that shouldn't matter much. A compass reading seems off. Another doesn't match it. The flight leader radios in, his voice calm but uncertain. He thinks they're over the Florida Keys. He's wrong. This is where tension creeps in. Not panic, not chaos, just confusion. You check your instruments again. They disagree. Land doesn't look like it should. Water stretches out where coastline is supposed to be. Mainstream historians point out that navigational errors were common during training flights, especially over open water where visual references are scarce. But knowing that doesn't make the moment any less uncomfortable. Radio transmissions grow more fragmented. The pilots discuss which direction to fly. East, west, north. Someone suggests turning toward the sun. Another disagrees. Fuel is burning steadily, indifferent to the debate. The weather begins to shift, clouds thickening, visibility dropping. You can almost feel time tightening, each minute narrowing the margin for error. What makes Flight 19 unforgettable isn't just that the planes disappeared. It's that people heard them getting lost. The confusion was documented in real time. The uncertainty was recorded. Later retellings would exaggerate details, but the core fact remains. 5 aircraft vanished during a training mission and were never conclusively found. A rescue plane is sent out to look for you. A large seaplane built to land on water if needed. And then something else goes wrong. That plane also disappears. An explosion is reported by a nearby ship, suggesting a fuel ignition midair. Mainstream explanations accept this as the likely fate of the rescue craft. But layered on top of Flight 19, it feels like the ocean making a point. One loss is tragedy. Multiple losses feel like pattern. Historians still argue whether Flight 19's leader made a critical navigational mistake and unintentionally led the group farther out to sea. One theory suggests he believed his compasses were malfunctioning and overcorrected, flying away from land instead of toward it. Another debate centers on whether poor weather reports underestimated the storm that rolled in that afternoon. None of these explanations are supernatural. All of them are deeply human. And yet the image sticks. 5 planes circling, radios crackling, daylight fading. You imagine the final moments not as terror but as exhaustion. Engines sputtering. The ocean rushing up to meet metal. A forced landing in rough seas would have been nearly impossible. The Avengers weren't designed to float long. Once down, survival time would have been measured in minutes. A quirky detail often overlooked is how quickly salt water destroys evidence. Aluminum corrodes, debris sinks or drifts. The Gulf Stream pulls wreckage far from crash sites. Even today, with advanced sonar, finding exact remains from incidents like Flight 19 is incredibly difficult. The ocean doesn't preserve neatly, it rearranges. In the years that followed, Flight 19 became the backbone of Bermuda Triangle mythology. Writers leaned into the mystery, smoothing out inconvenient facts and sharpening eerie ones. Compasses spinning wildly, pilots sounding calm moments before vanishing. Entire squadrons swallowed whole. Some of those details were exaggerated or invented outright. But the core disappearance was real, and real mysteries have a way of attracting fictional gravity. As you sit with that story, drifting onward through the same general airspace and water, you feel the quiet weight it left behind. Flight 19 wasn't ancient history. It wasn't mythic sailors with bad maps. It was modern men with engines, radios, and training, and they still didn't come home. That's what locks the Bermuda Triangle into your mind. Not that strange things might happen here, but that ordinary things fail in ways they're not supposed to. The story lingers with you as the ship presses on, and your attention keeps drifting back to the instruments. They glow softly in the dark, calm and confident, but now you're watching them the way people watch someone who's lied before, outwardly trusting, inwardly alert. Compasses, in particular, have earned an outsized role in Bermuda Triangle lore, not because they fail dramatically, but because even a small disagreement between needles can unravel a human mind when there's nothing but water in every direction. You pick one up, feeling its slight resistance as the needle settles. North is north, or at least it should be. Stories from this region often mention compasses spinning wildly, refusing to point correctly or contradicting one another. In popular retellings, this becomes the moment when technology itself turns against you. Mainstream navigational science, however, paints a calmer picture. Compasses are sensitive instruments. nearby metal, electrical systems, even the ship itself can cause deviations if not properly calibrated. On older vessels, this was a constant problem, not a supernatural one. Still, there's something uniquely unsettling about mistrusting your sense of direction. On land, you can walk until something looks familiar. At sea, direction is everything. Lose it, and distance becomes meaningless. Historians still argue whether reports of compass malfunctions in this region reflect genuine anomalies or simply stressed navigators misreading instruments under pressure. The ocean doesn't offer second opinions. A commonly cited fact is that the Bermuda Triangle is one of the few places where magnetic north and true north have aligned at certain points in history. This alignment shifts over time, but when it occurred, it confused sailors who weren't trained to account for it. Inexperienced navigators might correct for an error that wasn't there, slowly steering themselves off course. That kind of mistake doesn't feel dramatic in the moment. It feels logical, reasonable. By the time you realize something's wrong, you're already far from where you think you are. You imagine being in the cockpit of a plane, watching two compasses disagree by just a few degrees. Which one do you trust? Do you split the difference? Do you rely on memory instead? Over water, even small errors compound quickly. A few degrees off for an hour can put you dozens of miles away from safety. Mainstream aviation historians point out that many triangle-related flight incidents show clear signs of navigational drift rather than sudden catastrophe. There's also the human factor, which tends to get overshadowed by mystery. Stress narrows perception. Fatigue dulls judgment. In an unfamiliar environment, your brain looks for patterns, even false ones. A pilot convinced the instruments are wrong may ignore correct data in favor of gut instinct. Once that decision is made, every subsequent observation reinforces it. The compass says one thing, the ocean looks another way. You trust your eyes, forgetting how deceptive they can be over featureless water. A quirky tidbit often mentioned involves so-called compass variance zones, areas where local magnetic irregularities were rumored to exist. While small magnetic variations do occur worldwide, no credible evidence shows extreme anomalies unique to the Bermuda Triangle. Surveys of the region reveal magnetic behavior well within global norms, but the idea stuck because it offered a neat explanation for confusion without assigning blame to human error. You glance around the deck again. Everything feels steady, predictable, and that's the problem. When nothing looks wrong, you're less likely to question slow, creeping errors. Sailors in the past sometimes followed compasses faithfully while currents quietly pushed them sideways, shifting their actual path without their knowledge. The Gulf Stream is especially skilled at this kind of misdirection. Strong, fast, and invisible from the surface, it can carry ships miles off course while giving the illusion of smooth progress. Historians still debate how often compass issues versus current drift caused early navigational failures here. The truth is likely unsatisfying. It was usually a combination. A slight compass deviation, paired with an unaccounted current, layered with fatigue and weather. No single dramatic failure, just enough small ones happening together. As the night deepens, the stars overhead begin to blur behind thin cloud cover. In earlier centuries, those stars were backup instruments, reliable and ancient. Lose them, and you lost your last external reference. Modern technology has replaced starlight with satellites, but the principle remains the same. When your tools disagree, uncertainty rushes in to fill the gap. You rest your hand near the compass, the weather changing at first. That's the problem. It doesn't arrive like a warning siren or a dramatic wall of cloud. It slips in quietly, almost politely, as if it doesn't want to interrupt you. The air grows heavier. The wind shifts just enough to be felt, not enough to be questioned. Out here in this stretch of ocean, weather has a habit of turning fast, and by the time you acknowledge it, you're already behind. The Bermuda Triangle sits in a region where warm tropical air collides with cooler systems moving down from the north. Add the constant heat rising off the ocean's surface, and you get storms that can form with unnerving speed. Mainstream meteorologists point out that this area is particularly prone to sudden squalls and thunderstorms, especially during hurricane season. These systems don't always announce themselves clearly on early instruments, especially the older ones sailors once relied on. You feel the first real gust hit the ship's side, pushing it just enough to make the deck creak. The sky darkens unevenly, clouds stacking in layers that weren't there minutes ago. Rain begins as a light tapping, almost soothing, before thickening into something heavier. Visibility drops. The horizon dissolves into gray. This is where orientation starts to slip, not because anything is technically wrong, but because all your reference points disappear at once. Early sailors feared this kind of weather more than open storms. A full, raging storm at least declared itself. These fast-forming systems were deceptive. A calm morning could become a violent afternoon without much transition. Historians still argue whether many early mystery disappearances were simply the result of ships being caught in these rapidly intensifying conditions without time to react. The waves begin to rise, not dramatically but persistently, each one slightly larger than the last. The ship handles them for now, but you can feel the rhythm changing. Rogue waves, massive walls of water appearing seemingly out of nowhere, are rare but not impossible here. Modern science acknowledges their existence, once dismissing them as sailor exaggeration. Now they're measured, modeled, and still deeply unsettling. One well-timed rogue wave could overwhelm even a large vessel, leaving little trace. A quirky detail often mentioned is that the triangle's deep ocean trenches sit close to shallow banks, creating conditions where waves can stack and amplify unpredictably. It's not magic, it's geography, but experiencing it would feel no less surreal. A ship that disappears during such an event might never be found in recognizable form. The ocean floor here drops away quickly, swallowing debris into darkness. For pilots, weather is just as unforgiving. Thick cloud cover can erase visual horizons, forcing reliance on instruments alone. Turbulence in storm systems can be severe, especially for older aircraft like those in Flight 19. Add heavy rain, shifting winds, and fading daylight, and navigation becomes a mental endurance test. Mainstream aviation experts note that spatial disorientation has caused countless accidents, especially when pilots trust their senses over their instruments. You imagine flying straight and level while your body insists you're banking or climbing. The brain, under stress, is a poor judge of motion. In the triangle's weather, that conflict between perception and reality can become deadly. Historians still debate how much of the region's aviation lore stems from disorientation amplified by fast-changing atmospheric conditions, rather than anything unusual in the air itself. Back on the ship, rain drums steadily now, blurring lights and flattening color. The wind howls louder, threading itself through rigging and railings. It's not apocalyptic, it's just enough to demand attention. This kind of weather doesn't feel like an enemy. It feels like a test, one that never stops until you fail it or outlast it. Modern forecasting has reduced the mystery but not eliminated the danger. Even today, sudden storms catch vessels off guard. Technology helps, but it doesn't guarantee safety. The ocean retains the advantage. It always has. As the storm settles into its rhythm, you realize how easily stories are born here. A ship disappears in weather like this, and all anyone knows is that it was there, and then it was. No witnesses, no clear cause, just a storm that came and went, leaving silence behind. When the rain finally begins to ease, the sea looks almost peaceful again, as if nothing happened. That's the most unsettling part. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't stay violent, it resets. Calm water covering chaos, daring you to believe it was always this way. The storm fades behind you, leaving the air washed clean and strangely still. Above, the sky opens again, scattered stars peeking through thinning clouds. If you didn't know what this place was known for, you might relax completely. And that's usually when the next stories begin, not with waves or wind, but with silence. In the Bermuda Triangle, some of the most unsettling disappearances happen in the air, where there's no water to blame at first, just empty sky and radios that stop answering. You imagine yourself in the cockpit of a small aircraft cruising smoothly, engines steady, gauges reading normal. Flights over this region are routine. Commercial pilots pass through every day without incident. But then there are the exceptions, the flights that never call in late, never send distress signals, never show up on radar again. Mainstream aviation records confirm that a handful of aircraft were reported missing in this broad region during the mid-20th century, often under poor weather conditions. What's strange isn't just that they vanished, but how little they seem to leave behind. Radio silence plays a big role in these stories. You'd expect pilots to call for help at the first sign of trouble, but communication technology wasn't always reliable, especially in earlier decades. Signal range was limited, static was common, storms could drown out transmissions completely. Historians still argue whether some pilots tried to radio for help, but were simply never heard, their final messages swallowed by interference rather than mystery. There's also the uncomfortable truth about aircraft of the time. Many were single-engine or lightly built, with limited range and few backup systems. A mechanical failure over land is dangerous. Over open ocean, it's unforgiving. If an engine quits, your options narrow instantly. A forced landing on water is violent and chaotic, even in calm seas. Survival depends on speed, preparation, and luck, and even then, the window is small. A quirky tidbit often mentioned in aviation lore is that wreckage from plane crashes at sea can sink almost immediately, especially if the aircraft breaks apart on impact. Fuel disperses, debris scatters. The ocean's surface looks undisturbed again within hours. Without precise coordinates, search teams are left combing vast areas with little guidance. In regions like the Triangle, strong currents quickly erase any trail that might have led to answers. You think back to Flight 19 and how confusion, not catastrophe, dominated their final hours. Many other aviation incidents attributed to the Triangle follow a similar pattern. Disorientation, navigation errors, gradual drift off course, fuel exhaustion. Mainstream investigators often conclude that planes didn't vanish suddenly, they flew until they couldn't anymore. The disappearance happened later, quietly, beyond anyone's sight. Night flying adds another layer of difficulty. Without visible horizons, pilots rely entirely on instruments. Over water, depth perception disappears. Lights reflect strangely on clouds and waves. Historians still debate how often pilots mistook reflections for coastline or stars for city lights, unknowingly steering themselves farther from safety. The brain craves familiar reference points, and when it doesn't find them, it invents its own. You imagine watching your fuel gauge tick downward while land stubbornly refuses to appear. The engine hum remains constant, mocking your hope. There's no dramatic failure, no explosion. Just the growing certainty that you miscalculated somewhere earlier. By the time panic arrives, it's too late to fix anything. Military flights, civilian charters, private planes. The Triangle's reputation doesn't discriminate, but context matters. During periods of heavy air traffic, especially after World War II, more flights meant more opportunities for accidents to occur here. Statistically, it makes sense. Emotionally, it doesn't. When several planes vanish from the same general region, the mind insists on connection. Even modern planes occasionally report strange sensations over open ocean, sudden turbulence, instrument anomalies that correct themselves moments later. None of this is unique to the Triangle, but when it happens here, it's remembered differently. The location adds weight to every irregularity. As you look up at the night sky now, clear and calm, it's hard to reconcile that stillness with the idea of planes slipping silently into the sea. That's the enduring unease of this place. Not chaos, but quiet endings. Aircraft that don't scream or shatter on impact, but simply stop being part of the world anyone else can see. By the time the sea settles back into a steady rhythm, your thoughts drift downward beneath the surface to the stories that trouble people the most. Not the violent endings, not the storms or crashes, but the ships that were found, floating, intact, empty. These are the ones that refuse to resolve cleanly in the mind because they suggest interruption rather than destruction. A journey paused mid-sentence. You picture a vessel rocking gently on the water, sails loose, no smoke from the stack, no voices answering when another ship pulls alongside. The Mary Celeste is the most famous example often dragged into Bermuda Triangle discussions, even though its actual location doesn't neatly fit the triangle's borders. Still, the image sticks. Food left behind, cargo undisturbed, personal belongings untouched. Mainstream historians are quick to point out that this case likely involved human decision-making, possibly panic over a perceived threat like fumes or flooding. But its afterlife as a mystery far outgrew its facts. Other lesser-known cases followed similar patterns. Ships discovered adrift with no sign of struggle, lifeboats missing, logbooks ending abruptly. These details invite uncomfortable questions. Why leave a seaworthy vessel? Why abandon safety for uncertainty? Historians still argue whether such decisions were driven by misinterpreted danger, sudden environmental threats, or internal factors like illness or fear spreading through a crew. A quirky tidbit often mentioned is that even a small onboard incident, a strange noise, a sudden list, a strong smell, can cascade into mass panic at sea. Without clear information, crews sometimes assume the worst. In eras before accurate damage assessment tools, a minor leak might feel like a death sentence. Choosing to abandon ship could seem rational in the moment, even if history later judged it unnecessary. The ocean doesn't preserve intention. It only preserves outcomes. When a ship is found empty, there's no way to recover the conversation that led to that choice. No record of who argued for staying, who pushed for leaving. Those human moments dissolve, leaving behind a haunting stillness that invites supernatural explanations. You lean over the railing again, staring into the dark water. It's easy to imagine how currents could separate a lifeboat from its parent ship, carrying each in different directions. The Gulf Stream, fast and relentless, can move objects dozens of miles in a single day. A crew abandoning ship might never be found, while the ship itself drifts on, silent and accusing. Mainstream oceanographers see this as tragically plausible rather than mysterious. Still, the visual is hard to shake. An empty ship feels wrong in a way wreckage doesn't. Destruction makes sense. Abandonment demands a story. Writers have filled that gap with everything from sudden madness to unexplained forces. The Bermuda Triangle became a convenient stage for these tales, absorbing incidents from far beyond its supposed borders. There's also the matter of timing. Some ships were found days or weeks after being reported missing, their clocks stopped, their courses unchanged. This feeds into ideas of time distortion or sudden disappearance of crew. Historians push back, noting that mechanical failures, storms, or human error can explain most of these details. A ship without power doesn't maintain time. A vessel without crew doesn't adjust course. Normal causes, unsettling presentation. You imagine stepping onto one of these ships, the deck creaking under your feet, the air stale and quiet. No bodies, no blood, just the eerie sense that people were here recently and left in a hurry. Even if you knew the rational explanations, your instincts would scream that something was wrong. That instinctive discomfort is powerful. It turns incomplete evidence into fertile ground for legend. The Bermuda Triangle didn't create these stories, it collected them. It offered a narrative container for every unsettling maritime puzzle that didn't end neatly. As your own ship continues forward, crew present, voices audible, engines alive, you feel a small, irrational relief. As the ship carries you onward, the night grows quieter, the kind of quiet that invites thoughts you didn't plan to have. This is where the stories start to bend away from physical explanations and into something more slippery. Not storms, not compasses, time. Or at least the feeling that time doesn't always behave the way you expect it to out here. You've heard the accounts. Pilots who land safely but insist their flights took far less time than possible. Ships arriving hours late or early without clear reason. Clocks disagreeing with one another. Watches stopping and restarting. In the Bermuda Triangle, these stories often get grouped under the idea of missing time, a phrase vague enough to be unsettling without needing details. Mainstream historians acknowledge that such reports exist, but they're cautious. Memory, stress, and poor record-keeping can bend time just as effectively as anything mysterious. Imagine flying through thick cloud cover, turbulence rattling the aircraft, radio static hissing constantly in your ears. Your attention narrows. You stop checking the clock. When you finally land, someone tells you the flight duration doesn't match your recollection. That gap feels disturbing, even if it's explainable. Historians still argue whether many missing time accounts stem from altered perception during high-stress situations rather than actual anomalies. A quirky tidbit often mentioned is how humans are notoriously bad at estimating time without external cues. Remove sunlight, landmarks or routine, and minutes stretch or compress unpredictably. At sea or in the air, especially during monotonous or stressful conditions, your internal clock becomes unreliable. Long periods of calm can feel short. Moments of fear can feel endless. Later, when logs or radar data contradict memory, the discrepancy feels profound. Some stories claim aircraft encountered glowing fogs or strange lights, after which instruments malfunctioned and time seemed to slip. These accounts are controversial and often second-hand. Mainstream researchers note that atmospheric phenomena like St. Elmo's fire, a harmless electrical glow, have long been reported by sailors and pilots. Without context, such sights can feel supernatural. Paired with disorientation, they leave lasting impressions that grow in retelling. You glance at your watch now. It ticks normally, steady and reassuring. The seconds pass as they always have. Yet the ocean has a way of making you question even that. Days blur together at sea. Night follows night with little variation. Without routines, time becomes soft around the edges. It's easy to imagine how early sailors lost track of days entirely, arriving at ports unsure of when they left. Historians still debate whether any documented Bermuda Triangle cases show verifiable time distortion beyond human error. So far, none withstand close scrutiny. Flight times can be explained by tailwinds, delays by weather or navigation changes, clock discrepancies by mechanical issues. And yet the idea refuses to die. Time feels personal. When it behaves unexpectedly, it feels like a violation rather than a mistake. You think about how stories spread. A pilot mentions arriving way too early in a casual interview. A writer amplifies it. Another adds instrument failure. By the time it reaches popular culture, the story involves vanished hours and unexplained zones. The core event remains mundane, but the narrative surrounding it becomes irresistible. Still, sitting here in the quiet, you understand why time feels suspect in this place. There's nothing to mark its passage. No traffic noise. No changing scenery, just water, sky, and the slow movement of a vessel through space. It's easy to feel unmoored from normal rhythms. As the ship glides forward, you realize that missing time isn't about clock stopping. It's about attention drifting, about moments slipping past unnoticed. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't steal time. It makes you forget to hold on to it. And in that forgetting, stories grow. The deeper you drift into these stories, the more you notice a pattern. Whenever things become uncomfortable or unclear, attention turns toward authority. Surely someone official knows what's going on. Surely the military has answers. The Bermuda Triangle, after all, overlaps with heavily patrolled waters and airspace. The U.S. Navy and Coast Guard have been operating here for generations. If something truly unexplained were happening, they'd be the first to know. You imagine naval vessels cutting through these waters during exercises, sonar scanning the depths, radar sweeping the seas. To them, this isn't a haunted zone, it's a workplace. Mainstream military statements have long maintained that there is nothing supernatural about the region. Ships and planes are lost for the same reasons they're lost everywhere else: weather, navigation errors, mechanical failure, and human judgment. But official calm rarely satisfies public curiosity. When answers feel incomplete, silence itself becomes suspicious. One often repeated claim is that the Navy avoids the Bermuda Triangle or has classified data about strange incidents. In reality, naval traffic here is constant. Training exercises, patrols, and routine transits happen daily. A quirky but telling detail is that the Navy doesn't recognize the Bermuda Triangle as a distinct region at all. It doesn't appear in their manuals as an area requiring special procedures. To military planners, it's just Atlantic Ocean. Historians still argue whether the Navy's refusal to engage with supernatural claims helped fuel them. By sticking strictly to technical explanations and avoiding speculation, officials left room for storytellers to fill the gap. A missing ship explained as lost due to weather feels emotionally unsatisfying, especially when families want clearer closure. Flight 19 again looms large here, because it involved military aircraft. The Navy's official investigation concluded that the incident was caused by navigational confusion compounded by deteriorating weather. That explanation, while logical, didn't stop rumors from spreading. Some claimed the report was changed or softened to avoid embarrassment. Others insisted key details were hidden. No credible evidence supports these claims, but the idea of secrecy is hard to dislodge once introduced. You think about how institutions communicate. Military reports are written in technical language, stripped of emotion. They describe events in probabilities and procedures. For the public, that tone can feel evasive, even when it's not. Historians still debate how much of the triangle's mystique comes from this disconnect between official language and human storytelling instincts. Search and rescue operations add another layer. When ships or planes go missing, vast resources are deployed. Planes fly grid patterns, ships scan for debris. Days pass, sometimes weeks. When nothing is found, the operation ends. That ending feels wrong to outsiders, like a mystery abandoned rather than resolved. In reality, searches stop when probability drops too low. The ocean is simply too large. You imagine being part of one of those crews, staring at endless water through binoculars, knowing that if you don't spot something soon, you probably never will. The sea offers no hints, no closure. That absence gets interpreted as concealment rather than limitation. There's also the Cold War factor. During periods of heightened secrecy, any unexplained incident near military activity sparked suspicion. Submarines, experimental aircraft, classified routes, even mundane accidents felt charged with hidden meaning. The Bermuda Triangle absorbed those anxieties easily, becoming a symbol of things the public believed the government wouldn't talk about. As your ship continues its quiet journey, you realize how much the triangle depends on this tension between reassurance and doubt. Official voices say nothing unusual is happening. Personal stories insist something feels wrong. Somewhere between those positions, the legend survives. The military doesn't fear these waters, it respects them. And that distinction matters. Respect acknowledges danger without mystifying it, but respect doesn't make for gripping bedtime stories. Mystery does. After all the stories, the silence, the hints of secrecy, something else finally pushes its way into the conversation. Pushback. Not from skeptics trying to ruin the fun, but from scientists who got tired of watching normal ocean behavior dressed up as something it was. The Bermuda Triangle, they argue, isn't a mystery. It's a misunderstanding repeated often enough to feel real. You imagine researchers standing on the same deck you're on now, not scanning the horizon for omens, but collecting data, measuring currents, tracking storm patterns, comparing accident rates. Mainstream scientific studies have consistently found that this region does not have a higher rate of ship or plane losses than other heavily traveled parts of the ocean. That fact alone quietly undercuts the idea of a uniquely dangerous zone. Historians still argue about why that statistic never seems to settle the debate. One reason is that numbers feel cold compared to stories. A graph doesn't haunt you the way an empty ship does. When science explains something away, it often removes the emotional hook that made it interesting in the first place. One major point of contention is selective reporting. Writers who popularized the triangle frequently included incidents that fit the narrative and excluded those that didn't. Ships lost far outside the triangle's boundaries were pulled in. Others that were later found were quietly dropped from lists. A quirky but telling tidbit is that some ships once cited as mysteriously vanished were later discovered to have reached port safely under different names. The ocean didn't take them, paperwork did. You think about how easily information traveled before the internet. A dramatic article could circulate for years without correction. By the time someone challenged it, the story had already settled into public memory. Historians still debate how much of the triangle's reputation was built on these early, unchallenged claims rather than verified events. Meteorologists add their own perspective. The triangle's weather is not unique, just busy. Warm waters fuel storms, trade winds shift unpredictably, hurricanes pass through regularly. None of this requires mystery. It requires respect and preparation. Oceanographers point to the Gulf Stream again, emphasizing how quickly it removes evidence after accidents. Lack of wreckage doesn't mean lack of cause. It means the sea is efficient. Then there's human psychology. Once you expect danger, you notice it more. A compass wobble becomes meaningful. A radio crackle becomes ominous. Historians still argue whether belief in the triangle actually influenced behavior, making people more likely to misinterpret normal events as signs of trouble. Fear can change decisions. Decisions can change outcomes. Even the idea of unexplained is often misleading. Many incidents lack complete documentation, not explanation. Records were lost. Reports were incomplete. Search areas were too broad. Over time, gaps harden into mysteries. Scientists aren't claiming to know exactly what happened in every case. They're saying that ignorance doesn't equal anomaly. You feel the ship move steadily beneath you, engines humming, systems working as designed. Nothing about this place feels unstable. That normalcy is almost disappointing if you came looking for something stranger. But it's also reassuring. The ocean hasn't changed. Our storytelling has. The pushback doesn't erase the legend. It reframes it. The Bermuda Triangle becomes less a place and more a mirror, reflecting how humans handle uncertainty. When answers are partial, imagination rushes in to complete the picture. Science asks you to sit with not knowing. Stories promise you something more dramatic. As you stand here between those two impulses, you realize the triangle doesn't need to be supernatural to be unsettling. It's enough that it's vast, busy, and indifferent. That's a truth science can explain, but never make comforting. Even after science clears its throat and lays out the data, some ideas refuse to leave the room. They linger, half believed, half dismissed, because they offer something simple where reality feels messy. One of those ideas rises from the ocean floor itself, the methane bubble theory. It sounds technical enough to feel credible and strange enough to keep the mystery alive. You imagine what it would look like beneath your ship. Vast fields of methane hydrate trapped under pressure, frozen into the seabed like buried landmines. Under the right conditions, scientists say, those hydrates can destabilize and release enormous amounts of gas all at once. Mainstream geologists agree that methane releases do happen in certain parts of the world. The debate is about scale, timing, and relevance to the Bermuda Triangle. The theory goes like this. A massive methane release erupts from the ocean floor, turning solid water into a churning mix of gas and liquid. Ships passing overhead suddenly lose buoyancy and sink rapidly, without time to radio for help. To anyone watching from afar, the ship would simply vanish. No wreckage, no warning. Historians still argue whether this mechanism could realistically occur at the surface in this region with enough force to sink large vessels. A quirky tidbit often cited is that laboratory experiments show model ships can indeed sink in methane-rich water. Drop the density low enough, and buoyancy fails. But scaling that experiment up to real-world conditions is where the certainty collapses. The ocean is enormous. Gas disperses quickly. Most known methane hydrate fields aren't located where many of the triangle's famous disappearances occurred. You think about how appealing this idea is. It doesn't blame human error. It doesn't require supernatural forces. It offers a hidden, violent cause that leaves almost no trace. It explains silence. It explains speed. It explains why nothing is found. Even if the evidence is thin, the narrative feels complete, and completeness is comforting. Aviation versions of the theory stretch further, suggesting methane plumes could rise high enough to disrupt engines or instruments. Scientists are far more skeptical here. Methane disperses rapidly into the atmosphere, and there's no solid evidence of plumes large or stable enough to affect aircraft at cruising altitude. Still, the idea circulates because it links sea and sky into one tidy explanation. Historians still debate why methane theory gained so much traction compared to more mundane explanations. Part of it is timing. As oceanographic research expanded, the public became aware of hidden processes beneath the sea. The ocean stopped feeling empty and started feeling active, even volatile. The Bermuda Triangle was ready to absorb that new anxiety. You lean against the railing again, imagining bubbles rising silently from darkness far below. It's unsettling, even if you know it's unlikely to matter. The ocean floor feels distant and unknowable, a place where things can happen without your permission or awareness. That alone is enough to keep theories like this alive. Mainstream science doesn't dismiss methane outright, it just refuses to overextend it. Yes, gas releases occur. Yes, they can be powerful. No, there's no strong evidence they've swallowed fleets or squadrons here. But uncertainty leaves room, and room invites imagination. As your ship glides smoothly onward, unaffected, you realize that fringe theories survive not because they're proven, but because they answer emotional questions. They give shape to fear. The Bermuda Triangle collects these ideas the way it collects stories, layering them gently until fact and speculation blur into something that feels plausible enough to whisper about in the... You can feel the weight of all these explanations pressing together. Storms, compasses, human error, hidden gases. None of them alone feels satisfying, but together they form something quieter and more uncomfortable. The idea that most of what happened here wasn't dramatic at all. It was ordinary, and ordinary mistakes don't make great legends unless someone reshapes them afterward. You start to notice how often human error sits at the center of these stories, even when it's carefully disguised. A wrong heading chosen confidently, a weather report underestimated, a fuel calculation rounded optimistically. Mainstream historians point out that transportation accidents, whether at sea or in the air, are almost always chains of small decisions rather than single catastrophic failures. The Bermuda Triangle didn't break that rule, it just became famous for it. Storytelling does the rest. A ship lost due to poor maintenance becomes a mystery when its paperwork disappears. A plane that runs out of fuel becomes a vanishing act when no one sees it go down. Over time, retellings smooth away the human details and sharpen the eerie ones. Historians still argue whether the triangle is better understood as a case study in myth-making rather than geography. A quirky detail often overlooked is how corrections rarely travel as far as the original story. A sensational headline spreads quickly. A quiet retraction, published years later, barely moves. Some triangle incidents were eventually explained, wreckage found, causes identified. But those updates never gained the same attention. The mystery version remained lodged in public memory. You think about confirmation bias, even if you don't name it. Once people believed the triangle was dangerous, they started watching it differently. Every accident there felt meaningful. Accidents elsewhere faded into background noise. Historians still debate how much belief itself shaped the legend's growth. When you expect something strange, you're more likely to interpret events through that lens. There's also the role of media. Books, documentaries, and late-night radio shows needed content that felt unsettling but safe. The Bermuda Triangle fit perfectly, remote enough to feel exotic, familiar enough to feel plausible. Each retelling added a layer, an unexplained detail here, a dramatic pause there. Before long, the original event was buried under atmosphere. You imagine sitting with one of the people involved, an engineer, a navigator, a rescue pilot, and hearing a much less glamorous story. Equipment that hadn't been serviced properly, a decision made under fatigue, a storm that arrived earlier than expected. These explanations don't thrill, but they ring true. The ocean doesn't need to be supernatural to be deadly. Historians still argue whether stripping away the mystery does a disservice to those lost. Some feel legends distract from real lessons about safety and preparation. Others believe myths keep memory alive in a different way. Either way, the triangle survives because it tells us something about ourselves, how we prefer meaning over randomness. As the night deepens again, you realize that the most powerful force shaping the Bermuda Triangle wasn't water or weather. It was narrative. Humans trying to connect dots across time and distance, smoothing chaos into story. And once a story feels right, it's hard to let it go, even when the truth is quieter. You've peeled back the layers now, storms, errors, theories, and what's left isn't a monster hiding beneath the waves, but a question. If so much of this can be explained, why does the Bermuda Triangle still feel heavy in the mind? Why does it refuse to fade like other disproven myths? The answer isn't in the ocean. It's in how stories move through people. The triangle arrived at the perfect cultural moment. Post-war optimism mixed with anxiety. Technology advancing faster than trust in it. Planes flying farther than ever before. Ships growing larger, systems becoming more complex. When those systems failed, people didn't want small explanations. They wanted big ones. Mainstream historians still argue that the triangle flourished because it gave shape to modern fear. The idea that progress itself could still be humbled by nature. Media played its part. Books in the 1950s and 60s packaged scattered incidents into clean, dramatic narratives. Television followed, adding music, reenactments, and ominous narration. Each retelling polished the mystery further. Facts that complicated the story were quietly trimmed away. A quirky but revealing detail is that some authors openly admitted prioritizing readability over accuracy. The story mattered more than the record. You think about how the triangle functions almost like a campfire tale. It's not meant to be interrogated too closely. It's meant to be felt, to be passed along late at night when the world is quiet and uncertainty feels closer. Even skeptics know the name. Even pilots joke about it. Familiarity keeps it alive. Historians still debate whether the triangle would survive in today's hyper-documented world if it were invented now. Satellites track everything. Transponders ping constantly. Wreckage is easier to locate. Mysteries still happen, but they're harder to protect from explanation. The triangle persists because it was born before that transparency, in a gap between knowledge and imagination. There's also comfort in unresolved stories. A solved mystery ends. An unsolved one lingers, giving you something to return to. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't demand belief, it invites curiosity. You can half believe, half dismiss, and still enjoy the unease. As your ship continues through perfectly ordinary water, you realize that nothing about this place needs to be strange anymore. Its power comes from memory, not mechanics, from repetition, not danger. The ocean here is just ocean, but the idea layered on top of it has weight. You look out over the dark surface, reflecting stars in broken fragments, and understand something quietly. Myths don't survive because they're true. They survive because they're useful. The Bermuda Triangle gives form to the uncomfortable truth that sometimes things go wrong without spectacle or closure. And that idea, more than any storm or compass, is what keeps the legend afloat. The water looks different now, though nothing has actually changed. It's calmer, flatter, almost deliberately ordinary, as if the ocean itself is trying to prove a point. You're still moving forward, still surrounded by the same vastness, but the tension that once clung to every ripple has softened. This is the quiet exit most stories forget to mention. You pass through the so-called triangle the way thousands of ships and planes do every year, without incident, without fanfare, without ever realizing the exact moment you left it behind. There's no closing curtain, no sense of completion, just a gradual return to familiarity. And maybe that's the most honest ending this place can offer. Mainstream maritime data shows that the overwhelming majority of journeys here end exactly like this, uneventfully. No missing crews, no confused instruments, just people arriving where they intended to go, carrying only the memory of a long stretch of open water. Historians still argue whether the triangle's reputation would exist at all if nothing happened or considered interesting. You think back on everything you've heard tonight, the vanished ships, the silent planes, the empty decks, the arguments between science and story. None of it feels urgent anymore. The danger hasn't vanished, but it's settled into something manageable. The ocean didn't single anyone out. It didn't hunt. It simply existed, vast and indifferent, while humans tried to make sense of moments when things went wrong. A quirky detail worth remembering is that sailors who crossed these waters repeatedly often reported nothing unusual at all. Their logs were boring, weather noted, course adjusted, arrival confirmed. Boredom, it turns out, doesn't survive retelling. Mystery does. As land slowly reappears on the horizon, faint and reassuring, you feel the subtle shift that comes with closure. Not the dramatic kind, just the quiet relief of having crossed something people warned you about. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't trap you. It releases you without comment, leaving the story behind for someone else to carry. You step back from the railing, the hum of engines steady beneath your feet, and realize that the unease you felt earlier has thinned into curiosity. That's how this place works best. It doesn't scare you outright. It lingers, asking you to sit with uncertainty a little longer than you're used to. And now, as the night stretches on, that uncertainty finally loosens its grip. The ship keeps moving, slow and patient, as if it has all the time in the world. The water beside you slips past in soft, repetitive motions, each one blending into the next. There's no urgency left now. No mystery demanding attention. Just motion, steady and predictable, carrying you gently forward. The stories fade the way distant lights do at sea, first sharp, then blurred, then gone. Storms dissolve into memory. Compasses settle. Radios stay quiet because there's nothing left to say. The Bermuda Triangle becomes what it always was beneath the layers of legend. Open ocean, breathing in long, even rhythms. You don't need to solve anything tonight. You don't need final answers or perfect explanations. It's enough to know that you're safe, that the journey continues, that the world doesn't always need to make sense to keep moving. The mind can rest when it stops searching for patterns in the dark. The fan hums softly in the background. Your surroundings feel warmer, heavier, more distant. Thoughts slow, stretching out, losing their sharp edges. The sea you imagine drifts farther away, replaced by the simple awareness of being here now, listening. If anything lingers, let it be calm rather than fear. Let the vastness shrink into something gentle and abstract. The ocean isn't watching. The sky isn't waiting. Everything has returned to normal, and normal is quiet enough to fall asleep in. So stay where you are. Let the motion carry you. Let the stories sink back into the water they came from. End of script. Sweet dreams.